Hello and welcome, Caps fans. The Blue Liner on Point back with you here with another postmortem interview for the 2025-26 Washington Capitals season. This will be interview number 3, and I have yet another guest on who's consented to be with us to give their take on what happened this season. So let me go ahead and introduce him to you now. If you've followed the show long enough, should be familiar with him. We've had him on several times now. Blake Allen, otherwise known as Stat Guy Blake on Twitter and elsewhere, formerly of the Chirpin DMV podcast. Blake, how you doing this evening?
Doing well. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Very good, thanks. And thank you so much for coming on. It gives us some much needed street cred, for lack of a better relevant phrase, to have someone such as yourself come on and do this. Want to show everybody that we have our fan base has some pretty dialed in folks that know what's going on and know puck. So great to have you on to do this.
Yeah, happy to do it.
All right. Okay, so if you have listened to, there's one out there now, the first one I did with Mr. Robbie Gross. But if this is your first one that you're catching, I will go over the format once again. There are several questions I have prepared. I will be asking each one of Blake. I will be nothing more than an interviewer. There will be no feedback from me. I will proffer no opinions of my own. That's not what this is about. You want my opinions, you can listen to any other episode previous to this and listen to me drone on, but you will not have me jump out at any point to give my opinion. There may be a follow-up question or two to lead to whatever answer may be, but I am merely an interviewer for this particular segment. Okay, let's start with question number 1. So to set up that one, last season, this team largely the same roster finished at the top of the Eastern Conference. This season, they struggled for a good part of the season until the very end. What, in your mind, was the difference between last season's team and this one?
I think the biggest difference was that last season, we had just a bunch of guys have career years. And this year, those guys returned to who they really are. I think the best example is probably Connor McMichael. He had just he had a very high shooting percentage. I can't remember his exact point totals, but they were definitely, to me, a bit inflated. And I think that's not who he really is. And I think this year he returned to who he really was. That's not a knock on him. I just think that, when a bunch of guys all time the best season of their career the same year, you're going to get good results. And that's what happened last year, and we just weren't able to replicate it this year. I think one of the biggest issues in terms of what happened last, 24-25 versus 25-26.
All right, fair enough. Now, second question. Watching the team over the course of this past season, just as a matter of giving things the eye test, as it were, how would you say the team looked from game to game to game?
Yeah, so I kind of put the season in sort of, in my mind, I split it into sort of 4 different sort of mini seasons. There was the early days, October, first half of November, where we were kind of up and down. We had a little bit of a hot start and then we cooled off, and then we got hot again. And we had a really good second half of November. We had 6-game win streak, and we won like 8 of 9 or something like that. And then we had that Anaheim game where Leonard got hurt, and I don't necessarily think that Leonard was so. Again, this is not a knock on Ryan Leonard. I love Ryan Leonard. I think he's the real deal, but he is, he's a rookie. He's young. I don't necessarily think that him in particular is such a huge component of this team yet. I think going into next year he might be, but this year he necessarily wasn't. But it just threw off a bunch of things like the power play. I think we inserted him in there and he was contributing on the power play, and losing him caused a shuffle, right? And we were scrambling. And then over the course of the next 2 months, we had just a string of injuries. We had already lost Dubois in October. Then we lost Wilson after losing Leonard. There was a third player, and I'm trying to remember who it was. Somebody else got hurt. And at no point in that time did we have a fully healthy lineup. We were, scraping the bottom of the barrel. This was also at a period where I think the constant fight on Twitter was just Hendrix Lapierre's minutes, because we had nobody, and we were like, all right, but so if we're not going to play Lapierre, what on earth are we going to do? Because everybody is hurt. So, that whole time frame up until about the end of January, which was about coincided with Wilson's return, then things started to pick back up again, and then we ran into the Olympic break, and we came out of the Olympic break really hot. And honestly, truthfully, we stayed hot through the end of the season from there. There were some ugly losses, thinking about losing to the Rangers 8-1. That's a tough one. But in a season where if you'd been playing consistently through December, January, and you weren't already deep in this hole, you'd go, that's not great, but it doesn't actually affect our playoff chances. Shit happens. They're all professional athletes. You're going to lose even to the Rangers of the league at some point in the season, right? You just sort of write it off as, well, it happens. But when you had dug yourself such a deep hole, having such a brutal December and January, suddenly that 8-1 loss against the Rangers becomes just so massive. And it's sort of distracted from just how hot the Caps were playing after the Olympic break.
So following up on something you just mentioned, what would you say was, if you could pin it to one thing, what would you say was the one thing that went wrong in the months of December and January?
I think it is hard to pin it on one thing. I think the big thing, I would say, injuries. Again, those crucial injuries to Dubois, Wilson, and Leonard are sort of the really big ones. They weren't the only ones. That just threw off our whole rhythm. First of all, no team's going to succeed when you are missing your top line center. It's just, they're your top line center for a reason. And that became immediately apparent as soon as he came back, just how much the team improved overnight like that. And, Wilson's arguably your best player, second best, third best, somewhere in there. He's, at least the top 3 player for you. He was also missing for periods in there. Leonard was, not necessarily a top player, but he was a big contributor, and he missed portions of time in there. So, and on top of losing those talents, you're also shuffling people around and screwing with line chemistry and guys being in and out of the lineup. And so, you're trying to see who you have in such and such a player, and he's moving all around the lineup. He's sometimes in the press box, and he's just not getting into a rhythm. Those sorts of things affect guys. And so it was just this cascade that came out of all the injuries. And so you have things like, the power play. The wheels came off the bus on the power play. It was a complete disaster from start to finish this season. I think there's underlying issues there, but we had some success when Ryan Leonard was in the lineup earlier in the season and on the power play, and then he was taken away, and then we were like figuring out what we're doing, and so there was no real way to sort of find a footing there and get things really going, and so pinning it on one thing is difficult. But I guess I'm going to count injuries as one thing. It just put us in such a deep hole in December and January that we just had some crucial games in there that we were not. This isn't to say that we. Some people see their team struggle with injuries and think that somehow that's unfair and that if we weren't injured, we would be in the playoffs. So we deserve to be in the playoffs. Whatever. This is not that. This is just the facts of the matter is that injuries heavily affected us this season. They came to key players at key times and they stacked. They didn't, it wasn't like we lost Dubois and then we lost Leonard and then we lost Wilson. At one point we were playing without all three of them, I believe. And it's difficult to deal with that. And there's also, this team wasn't a contender. Last year, I don't think we really were as good as we played. There were a bunch of, I forget what our exact record in one goal game was, but it was crazy. We had a bunch of weird comebacks, stuff like that just, if you're relying on that as a strategy, it's not going to go well. And then we didn't change a whole lot with the whole roster, as you mentioned, at least not coming into the season. And so really we were counting on some of those things that you can't really count on to happen. And ultimately they didn't. And then also we had just these brutal, crucial injuries that really messed us up.
All right. So shifting focus more towards your perspective, which of course is statistics, analytics, metrics, key metrics of the game. And I'll apologize to beforehand. I did this to my own in-house stats person, who was my last interviewee. You can hear her interview once I publish it later this week. But I'll go ahead and ask you the same thing. Absent of the special teams, what would you say was the key stat or metric, either team-wide or individually, that pointed to what was the key factor of this team's fortunes this season?
Besides special teams, you're killing me. I've got one. It's not particularly an advanced stat, I would say, but your leading goal scorer, Alex Ovechkin, having 32 goals that's not necessarily a recipe for success. Not Ovechkin having 32 goals. That's fine. He's 40. He's not a spring chicken anymore. It's crazy that he's still able to put up 30-goal seasons at his age. It just speaks to just how unbelievably great he is. But for a 32-goal scorer to be your highest scoring player, that's not necessarily a recipe for success. And I think that speaks to our biggest area of need going into next season is we need, that high-end winger. And I know everybody's talked about it. We talked about it last offseason. I've seen Chris Patrick talk about it, of just needing that high-end winger. And the trouble is they're hard to find. They're expensive if you can find them. But yeah, I think that's one that I would point to there. I think a lot of our advanced stats were actually decent. They weren't great, but they were, for the most part, top half of the league in many. There's not really any 5v5 metric where you go, well, see, that's why we suck, you know. Um, and taking away the power play from me here is just brutal, because I think that was one of the driving factors behind how badly the season went, was that we never ever got the power play going until 10 games left in the season. I think Cole Hudson was instrumental in getting the power play going, but he didn't come up until March. So that doesn't really help us. If we had been, perhaps if we had been in a position to go into the playoffs and now all of a sudden we solve the power play, then you're looking at, maybe making some noise. I, again, still don't think that would have made us contenders, but, anything can happen. But it was just, we were in such a deep hole at that point. And again, in large part due to the power play. But in lieu of blaming it on the power play, I'm going to say that it's tough when you're absent a 40 or 50 goal scorer.
So looking at all of the figures, top to bottom, what would you say is a metric or performance, some sort of measurement of performance this year that either surprised you or you could point to as saying, well, at least they did this very well?
Yeah, so
if any.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things you could point to. The penalty kill, people dogged on the penalty kill a lot, and I think there were portions of this season where that was true. But by the time we got to February or whatever, the penalty kill actually pretty much figured itself out. And I hoped that the power play would follow shortly after, but it didn't. We had multiple instances down the stretch where I remember we went down. We had 5-on-3s against us, and I was like, here it comes, and we were routinely able to keep the puck out of the net for the entire 5-on-3, which is, obviously huge, both in terms of not getting scored on, but also the momentum boost that comes after killing off a 5-on-3, and so definitely the penalty kill. And another area was goaltending. Logan Thompson just played out of his mind, and the numbers bear that out. He led the league. He led the league in goals saved above expected, and he looked like it too. I think it was Nashville, I want to say. He stopped a 2-on-0. I mean, who does that? Logan freaking Thompson, man. He played out of his mind all season long. He had about a 2-week stretch somewhere in January or February. We've reached the unsustainability. And then he just ratcheted it right back up. It was this short 2-week lull, and he went right back to it. And for a lull, it was still, he went from Vezina candidate to maybe a top 5 goalie of the league. That was his lull. So he had just an unbelievable season, and it's incredibly frustrating to watch. To watch us be unable to capitalize on just such a great goaltending season, because as we saw with Braden Holtby, all it takes is your goalie getting hot, and then who knows?
Building on what you just mentioned about LT, do you have any concerns that the style of play that the Caps seem to put on the ice, whether 5-on-5 or special teams, what have you, given any situation, do you have any concern that eventually that will wear on LT, or that we may come to a point where he's just simply being overused and over relied upon? And can you see anything figures wise that backs that up? If not, fine. But can you quantify if you believe that to be true?
I wouldn't say I'm worried about it. I'm worried about goaltending every single year just because in my soul I don't have it in me to trust in the concept of year over year consistent goaltending, but I don't necessarily see any real reason for that. I also think that part of, so at times they're a little bit more aggressive, more loosey goosey, whatever you want to call it, with in front of Logan Thompson, I think is because they just trust him to be there. And I think if they felt concerned about that they would just tighten it up. Now this was earlier in the season and I can't remember when, but I pulled some sort of stat that showed that they do indeed allow more high quality chances on Logan Thompson than they do on Chucky. And I think that just speaks to just how confident they are when they have Logan Thompson in the net. And so I suppose that's possible, but I also think some of that is a decision that they could change their minds on if it came to it, as opposed to just, this is just who the Caps are. And if Logan Thompson can no longer handle the workload they're giving him, then we're just going to go down the drain immediately. I think there's some evidence that points to it being a decision that, like I said, they can just not do that anymore if they deem it necessary.
All right. So next question. We are, unfortunately, heading to an early point in the offseason, an early exit from the season, no playoffs, but optimism because of unprecedented draft capital and cap space. Given all that, what would you say, if there is one, if you believe there is one, is a top priority for the offseason? And in addition to that, examples, if you have any, of some moves you would like to see made by the front office.
Yeah, so I definitely think number one priority is getting that top end winger, like I talked about earlier, and I do think that's easier said than done. I think I've seen people kind of start setting things up where if it doesn't pan out, then they're ready to just throw the baby out with the bathwater, and Chris Patrick's horrible and doesn't know what he's doing. I've already seen a lot of people are frustrated with this front office and perhaps turning up the temperature on Chris Patrick's seat. And I don't necessarily agree with that, especially if such a move doesn't pan out, it's really hard to find these guys. And the Caps had a lot of success with it, in the 2010s. We, finding guys like Semin, Backstrom. I know those guys were technically before the 2010s, but you know what I mean. Semin, Backstrom, Kuznetsov, Vrana for the length of time that he lasted. It went so well for us for so long that I think people forget that it was a little bit easier because those guys were supporting, our easy first ballot Hall of Famer Alex Ovechkin, and so they never had to be the guy, and so it's easier to find your second guy than it is to find the guy, and if you find one, then you got to pay for him, which, we're in the fortunate position. Like you said, we do have cap space and draft capital that I think really helps us get to, a point where that might be possible, but it is still going to be expensive. I I think the best example would be Jason Robertson. Uh, I don't know that he's going to be available. I'm not too up to date on exactly what his contract situation is and all that, but I I do, he would be a great get if you can get him. I it's tough. Um I've had a couple people throw out, what about Austin Matthews? And if I've said this before, if we could guarantee that what we were getting was, the Austin Matthews of a couple of years ago, who was putting up nearly 70 goals, I would say do whatever it takes to get him. But he was not like that before his injury this year, and now he's going to be coming back from a pretty severe injury. I just don't. You're going to be paying the same price, but now you're getting a spin at the wheel, not a guaranteed elite player. So it's really tough. I've seen Robert Thomas and Kyrou. I would be fine with them. I don't want to, move heavens and earth to go get them. In terms of optimism, I do think that there's some great news with the youth movement on this team. You look at Sordiff, you look at Leonard, you look at Hudson, you look at the younger Protus. The elder Protus isn't exactly old either. He's entering his prime. So there's a lot of really good talent there. The jury's still out on if Ryan Leonard could be that guy that I've been talking about. I think it's possible. I don't know that I would count on it at this stage. He's definitely going to be a huge, important piece for this team for years to come, and I'm very excited about him. Whether or not he's going to be, our high-end, elite, perennial all-star scoring talent who leads us to the promised land, I don't know that I would count on that. But again, huge, important, awesome piece. And is getting Sordiff for a second is crazy work. I love that kid, and he's, I'm sold on him. I think it's all up from here for him. Hudson is just bonkers, insanely good. I can't get enough of watching him play. But yeah, I still think we're going to need, even despite all that youth, we're going to need a big gun, a howitzer, somebody who can just take over a game. And I don't know that we have that on the roster right now. And those guys are tough to find.
All right. So last prepared question, as it were. And again, I'll try to set the scene here. There appears to be something of an ongoing theme among Caps fans that, again, for lack of a better phrase, at least in my observation, Ovi is the problem, or Ovi is the solution. And that double-mindedness is becoming more and more pervasive, especially if you go on social media like Twitter, where people like to hunker down into extreme opinions. Now, those of us who know better know that there is a middle ground, but maybe it's not quite so easy to get to. What would be overall your take on what this team should consider, whether or not Ovi comes back, decides to come back this year or next year?
Yeah. So I want to start off by saying that I am 100% on Team Ovi back next year, not for any sort of objective reasons. the 10-year-old kid in me who got to go to his first game is not ready to say goodbye. I need one more year. I need a proper farewell tour. I'm just not ready to say goodbye yet. And I also think he's the kind of player that if he says, I want to come back, you let him come back. That being said, he obviously is not what he used to be, and that it shouldn't be expected for him to be. He's 40. He's going to be 41 next year. There were definitely some glaring issues at times. I also know it came out last week. I think I saw Sammy Silver report it that he dealt with a hamstring issue early on in the season, which explains a bunch of what we saw early on in the season and why he was gradually able to sort of pick things back up as that hamstring healed. And I think that there are some things we're holding on to that we shouldn't be holding on to. I don't need to see him for 2 minutes on the power play anymore. I certainly don't need to see him on the point on the power play anymore. That was phenomenal while it lasted, and that time is over. I think he's still the kind of guy you want in the mix on the power play. He's never been the best defensively, but he's great offensively. That's the kind of guy you throw out there on the power play. So I think some people, and I probably said this at some point in the season, but I don't know that maybe a heat of the moment thing, but I think some people are just fully ready to just completely throw him off the power play entirely. I don't think that's a smart move. I think the power play is great use of his talents. He doesn't have the energy left to go for 2 minutes straight like he used to. And, especially with him at the point, the league has figured that out, and it is time to move on. I would put him, in the net front, in the bumper, something. I would not have him at the point anymore. His shots lost a couple miles an hour. It's still really good, but he's 40 years old. It's not what it was when he was 25 or 30. In terms of 5-on-5, I did some digging recently. So, there's a degree to which you can measure just every team, and you can see it. And I think it's true at all levels of the game. I've seen this in like beer league. Is just that when you have a lead, you turtle a little bit, and when you're trailing, you're more aggressive. And I found some stats that show that in those situations, so in that leading situation, Ovi performs worse, and he performs way better when we're behind and being more aggressive. And so I would think in terms of his role, you take that into account, and you give, if we've got a lead, especially a multi-goal lead, let him rest, save up that energy going, so that he can be more effective for longer. And then when you're trailing, that's when you really deploy Ovi. Not to say you should never play him when we have a lead, but just, be more judicious about when you use him when we have a lead. Whereas if we're trailing and we need a goal, just let him fly, send him out there. Because, it's less likely that we're going to, it's not likely, but it's less likely that we're going to run into teams being as aggressive and him needing to be solid in the defensive zone, just like how it almost became a meme this season of him getting no D zone starts until like the last 2 weeks of the season. Excuse me. And so that's one really effective use with Ovi is just send him out when we're in the offensive zone already. Don't, if we're in the D zone, don't start him. Wait until it's, on the fly or a offensive zone face off to send him out there. And I think a similar strategy we can use to minimize the amount of defense he's going to have to play and maximize his opportunities to score is, resting him a bit when we have a lead and throwing him out there more when we're behind and need a goal.
Right. All good. Okay. So finally, was there anything that was not covered in the questions, or were there any aspects that you would like to further elaborate on or speak to with regard to how the Caps performed this past season?
Honestly, I could just keep gushing about the young guys. I really, really love Sordiff. He's clearly got, the skill to be, potentially a second center at some point, at least a top flight 3C, potentially a 2C. He's got the skill set there. He's got the talent. He's got the skating ability. And he's got that grit, that, never say die, just grinding, fighting for every inch of ice mentality. Like I just the number of times I saw him just like shoving, throwing his body weight around, fighting, battling for pucks. He's not a huge guy. And just fighting desperately tooth and nail for every puck, stripping guys of the puck and battling the boards and all those sorts of things that I love. I think he did, he's got kind of both sides of the game there like that, where he can be gritty and tough and rough, and he can also, dance around you and make crazy, beautiful passes. I cannot sing praises enough. Same thing, similar thing with Hudson. I think, I do think in Hudson's case, there's signs that there's going to be some growing pains next season. I see some potential for some defensive miscues. He could work on keeping the puck into the blue line. But those are things he's gonna work through and grow through. And I think I'm preemptively getting ahead of Caps fans, getting overly mad with him when it happens, because he's still so young. It's going to happen, guys. It's okay. He'll be fine. Just focus on those just dirty dangles at the point, dancing around guys, passing the puck between guys' legs. That's what we're going to have. And he's going to clean up the other stuff. It's just going to take him some time. And I think he's, potentially the missing piece on the power play. I think he's going to be great. Leonard really started to look more and more comfortable as the season went on. He got off to a little bit of a slow start, but again, that's kind of one of those. Yeah, he's a rookie. He's going to have a slow start. They got to learn. They got to learn these things. But I'm very excited about his progression. The younger Protas is going to be great. We only got a couple of games on him, so it's tough to really get a read on where he's at. But I think there's a lot to be excited about there, and this is, I think, the first time in years where you can really look at the guys under 25 on this team and say, this is a really good situation, and we're going to be great going forward with this young core.
Okay, very good. All good information here. Okay, so with that, I think this is a good place to stop. Well, we're gonna go ahead and end it here now. If we have some listeners that I know one in particular may be interested in discussing things with you. Is there? Do you have a contact point you would like to give out in case anyone out there wishes to get with you, or would you like to keep that private? I understand if you would.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter a lot. You can always tweet at me or DM me. I answer. My Twitter handle is AlanCaps1995. Right now, I'm on the Sabres bandwagon, so my name on Twitter is Sabres Guy Blake. But once they're out or the playoffs are over, that'll go back to Stat Guy Blake. But yeah, I check my DMs if if you want to reach out to me privately, or you can always tag me.
All right, fair enough. So once again, Blake, thank you so much for doing this. And so you and the listeners can look for this to be published. Probably timeline's probably going to be early to middle of next week. My plan is now to I'm probably going to be doing about 4 or 5 of these. So we're looking about one or so a week, just to kind of keep our show relevant at least into May. So if you're interested, go ahead and look for that. So Blake, thanks once again for doing this, and hope a lot of this, a lot of what you said, especially with the young guys, comes true.
Yeah, me too.